then there's always the hidden benefits of writing a book, like confidence, courage, the chance to really pull your signature program together, or wherever you might be taking your book, build your brand. There's so many reasons why somebody might write a book, but I think anyone can write a book, but having that support is useful. That's why there are people like me and editors, ghostwriters. I know a couple of really good ghostwriters as well, but we're there to guide people through the process. So when they feel like it's really hard, there's someone there to say, you can do it, and champion them.
This is the Born to be Brilliant podcast, helping you harness the habits and unlock the tools to bring you more meaning, vibrance, and the personal power to help you shine like the diamond you are. I am here with Karen Williams today. She is the book mentor, helping entrepreneurs and business owners and thought leaders to get their stuff into a book and make an impact. Karen, a massive welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Lucy. Thanks for inviting me. We kind of pulled this together quite quickly, so I'm excited to see where it might go today.
I know, I love that. It's going to be completely organic and real and raw, as we like it here on the Born to be Brilliant podcast. So Karen, talk to us a little bit about who people are going to tune in who are either thinking of writing a book or have always dreamt of writing a book, or maybe have written a book and are maybe wanting to go again. Like, why write a book?
That's $1 million question. I think I talked to so many people who've been wanting to write a book for years, and then one day something taps them on the shoulder and says, now's the time to do it. And it might be the fact they find themselves repeating themselves time and time again. It might be that people keep telling them they need to write a book. It might be that they want to really grow their business and build their authority, credibility. So there's so many different reasons why to write a book. And there is kind of what I would call the reasons that we probably know inside ourselves. Like, we want to build our credibility, authority, expert status. We want to reach more people to get better known. But then there's always the hidden benefits of writing a book, like confidence, courage, the chance to really pull your signature program together, or wherever you might be taking your book, build your brand. There's so many reasons why somebody might write a book.
And you always said your book is your hook. I loved that. That stuck with me for probably more than a decade. My first book actually is a decade old now, and it really was around that. Like, creating that book was about, like, okay, I want to be known in this space. This is what I do. And let's put that into a book. It's a mark of authority. It gets you onto more stages. It gets people taking you seriously, and it's also like an entry level customer thing, isn't it, on the journey? It's like, you start with the book, see how you like that. They get a feel for you and what you do. I really like the essence of that. But a lot of people will go, well, yeah, but I can't write. I'm not a writer. I can't spell, or I meet so many people who would love to write but just can't. Yeah. I'm not one of them. I love writing, and I think I'm all right at it. But for somebody who isn't, perhaps they'll have dismissed the idea because of that. The idea of maybe getting a ghostwriter or all these other things can seem daunting or expensive. What would you say to somebody who's in that bracket?
I think the most important thing when it comes to writing a book is not necessarily the writing, but it's clarifying that idea first. And I think once you've got that idea and that idea pulls you, that you're passionate about, I think you're more likely to get over any hurdles that get in your way. I've worked with people who's writing in English as their second language, so they kind of think in some think in their original language, so Croatian, German, etc., and some do think in English as well, but it's still different, and it still takes a little bit more energy. I've worked with quite a few clients who are ADHD, dyslexic, who struggle with the writing process. They struggle with kind of seeing the process from start to finish. But I think anyone can write a book, but having that support is useful. That's why there are people like me and, editors, ghostwriters. I know a couple of really good ghostwriters as well. But we're there to guide people through the process. So when they feel like it's really hard, there's someone there to say, you can do it, and champion them. And somebody who can co-write it with them if necessary, or even write it for them. I think, it comes down to that idea that kind of pulls you, that makes you want to do it no matter what. And I think that's a good starting point to have.
Yeah. And it's extracting that, isn't it? It's extracting that from that person. So even if you can't get the words down, there are so many ways that you can extract that goodness and get it into a book. There's loads of famous published authors out there. And I think I recently really had to think about the fact that sometimes the author isn't the writer, and the author has shared all of this stuff, and then the writer or somebody has helped pull that all together. And some of the best books out there have been done that way. So that's really, I think, important for people to realize. So, okay, so let's go to that then. Why, like you just said, the essence of like that passion, and I want to get this out. And what typically drives that in somebody? That, you know, the motive, I guess.
I think for many people I work with, they've been talking about what they want to write in their book for years. So in essence, and going back to the last question, Lucy, you know, we've probably got, you know, material, webinars, podcast interviews we've done, workshops we've run, conversations we've had with clients, maybe market research we've done, you know, blogs we've written, videos we've done. I think most people, if they've been talking about their topic for long enough, they've got a lot of the material already. They don't have to start from scratch, which makes it easier as well. And so I think I've gone off topic with the question. I think it's really important to mention that actually a really good book aligns your business and your book together. So I think a lot of people, when it comes to a book, they think, well, I'm writing a book and I'm running a business. How do I fit the two together? But actually, if you're really smart about it, you fuse the two. So what you're talking about on a day-to-day basis with clients is the material that goes in your book. That gives you ready-made case studies that you can slot in with their permission. If you're talking about a process that you take people through like I do, again, that can become a book or podcast interviews. You know, Lucy, great idea for your next book. Bring together all of the podcast interviews for you know, there's all sorts of different ways in which you can do it. And I think it's about being smart about the process. So when you see it as one entire entity, it feels less daunting, I think. It feels less daunting than thinking I'm writing a book and it's sort of standalone, you know, over here. When you're trying to do everything else, when you integrate everything together, you have a really good ecosystem. That's where the magic happens.
That's so true, actually. And I did take that approach to my first book. It was, well, I've written some blogs, so like, you know, actually quite a lot of blogs. And I was like, right, well, how many of these blogs would, I did take that kind of idea and then shape that into the chapter summary and of everything, like working out how that would slot together. I think that's quite a good practice as well, like the skeleton of that book and what, you know, just even mapping out a rough idea of what you would want to cover off. What do you want the reader to take from it, and how do you take them through that journey in almost chapters? Like once you've got that, putting meat on the bones becomes so much easier. And
that's so important. It's the most important part of the process is the planning. And a lot of people feel like the first thing they should do is open up their Word document or open up Scrivener and start writing. But actually, the more planning you do, the easier it is to write. When you're, you know, I take people through my process and getting really clear on your vision. You know, why are you writing the book? What's it going to give you and your readers and your business? Being clear on what the topic is and what else has been written and what makes your book different. Doing the research and actually finding that secret sauce that you add to the party. And obviously the structure of the book as well, because otherwise you can write. And I do have people come to me with 30, 40,000 words written and say, Karen, can you help me? And I go, I wish you'd come to me sooner. Because the planning part of it is so important. And I think people underestimate the importance of getting crystal clear on the idea. I'm writing my next book at the moment. I'm doing the shaping. I've written about 2,000 words, but it's more important for me to get the shaping right, because when I know exactly what I'm writing, the writing part will be really easy. I say really easy, fairly easy.
I agree, actually. Recently I finished a book proposal, and the process, I loved the process because it makes you do all of that. And yes, it was mapped out for me and there were the steps in the process, but in doing that, you have to go and research, you know, what is similar and what would be a competitive title, what does make you different, how are you even gonna. So I've, you know, in the process of the book proposal, you even have to look at the marketing of that and what are you going to do to market it? Otherwise, you've got a lovely book that no one knows about. So
very true.
How are you actually going to get that book out there into the world? It doesn't sell itself. And again, the purpose of it in the first place, is it a glorified business card and a strategy in your business, or is there another why behind it? Or is it just something that's for self, you know, an achievement and a goal? Like that's fine too, like whatever, as long as you're clear on what you're doing it for. But in that process, I had all these pieces mapped out, the chapters, the summaries, and then it's like, right, I need to do some sample chapters. That became a breeze. So if I'd have tried to start there, I would have been like, you know, writer's block, so stuck. But I'm like, right, brilliant. I know what this chapter's about. I've got a rough summary. Let's go. And I was like on fire. I was like, oh, I could do another one. And then you can see how you don't have to write in order. Like you can go, oh, actually, I'm going to do that chapter and that chapter and jump around, because you can already see how it's going to knit together, which for me, that was great because it helped break it down into bite-sized chunks. So I'm now like, yeah, I could get that finished in no time because I've already, I understand it. I can, I can see where it's going. Is that something you help people with? Do they go through, I suppose that would be the structuring. If they're going to self-publish, you wouldn't necessarily need a proposal, but that's part of the planning, isn't it?
Yeah, it's absolutely part of the planning. I think it's part of the planning for whatever book you're writing, whether you are publishing it yourself or whether you're going down the traditional route. I think it's more important, obviously, if you're pitching to publishers, it's really important, absolutely essential. But even if you're publishing it yourself or, using a self-publishing partner, you need to do that because it helps you to get crystal clear. And I saw somebody I know who's a ghostwriter, and he put something on LinkedIn today that said, you need that log line, that one line that basically says what your book is about. So, I've started talking about mine, and I can tell you, maybe not right now in the podcast, but exactly what it's about. And and that's the thing, is it's when people say, oh, you're writing a book, can you tell me about it? And you waffle around the topic. You're not clear on it yet. So absolutely doing a proposal is really important. And I take people through that process as part of my Smart Author system, which is what I do. So not necessarily around the proposal as such, creating a document, but it's exactly the same elements in terms of the summary, your bio, the marketing. And the marketing obviously is something that you need to do from the get-go. You can't wait until your book is, on the shelves out there. No, that's way too late. And there's so much subtle stuff you can do to market your book right from the moment you start writing it, even to just talking about it.
I love that. And yeah, people want to see the journey, don't they? They love like knowing behind the scenes and things. I love what you said there about that line. So I was, so many times I've been in that position where I'm like, yeah, so I'm going to work on this book. And somebody will say, cool, what's it about? And I'm like, and I like freeze up and I'm like, I don't know how to answer that question, because there was a point where I couldn't articulate that. I didn't know how to articulate that. And I did feel a bit stuck. It's like somewhere in my being, I knew, but I didn't know how to verbalize it at that point in time.
Yeah.
And I remember slightly trying to waffle my way through that question. And I knew I was going to be asked as well. I set myself up for it and I wasn't prepared. And I went all around the houses with it and I thought, right, I really need to get this nailed. And what I found was actually, the truth is I don't think I was ready at that point. And I was trying to force it out of myself. It's like, you're not ready yet. You're not ready to write the proposal. You're not ready to, it hasn't properly landed for you yet. It's coming. And then I allowed myself the grace to just kind of let that all settle, explored the different thought patterns and everything until it became clear. And when it became clear, oh my gosh, it became clear. And then I was like, yes, I can now say, this is a book about this, and this is what it's going to cover, and this is who it's for, and this is how it's going to work. And it's everything I kind of knew inside it needed to be, but I could never have told you that 6 months ago. Like it was too scattered. And I am wired in an ADHD way, and I have that like, well, hang on, but this, all this and that, and the chaos. So I had to like go, wait, actually, let's just slow this down, not force it. And then it comes. Being able to articulate that is so key. How do you, I wish I'd had some help with that. I didn't, and I got there, but eventually. But how would you help somebody with that? If somebody were to come to you and they were working with you and they're like, yeah, that's resonating with me. That's where I am right now. What does a book mentor do to help bring that stuff forward?
Well, I think for many people, when they make that decision to write a book, they might tell their partner, their friends, other people in their family, maybe some colleagues. They might tell a few trusted people. And you know what it's like when you talk to other people. They have their own opinion. They start to see doubts in your mind. They start to maybe put you off from the process because they might go, oh, it's such a big job, you can't do it. Actually, when you're working with a book mentor, you're working with a trusted person who is going to be honest with you, but also going to encourage you. Certainly, if people haven't followed, or they're not willing to embrace the process I take them through, I'm not the right book mentor for them. If they want to start writing their book, or they're not willing to make the changes I suggest, I'm not the right person for them. And it is really getting that clarity of that message. So just going back to what you were saying a moment ago, Lucy, being clear on, my book is for this type of person who is struggling with this problem, and my book is going to help them to get this result, and I'm the best person to help them because of my authority. That's a great 4 sort of step process that everybody can follow. So, that's a really good way of actually really starting to articulate that idea. I take people through a process. Basically, everyone who works with me, either through one of my group programs or one-to-one, I go through a strategy call with them where we kind of get that clarity of what the book is about. They send me stuff and I'm good at reflecting back and kind of holding up that mirror. I trained as a coach back in 2006 before books were even a tiny, tiny spark, behind my eyes. So I kind of know how to approach it in that respect. And it's just having it reflected back makes people realize that they know more than they think, that they have the courage. It kind of gives them that momentum to move forward. I think a lot of people, when they're trying to do it by themselves, they're trying to walk through that sludge, aren't they, of that kind of, 1 step forward, 2 steps back in terms of, is this good enough? Does it sound right? Is it going to land? Do people want it? And if you're second guessing yourself, you probably won't move forward at all with it.
That's so true. And I think actually it's amazing what people out there do want, like the crazy nuanced and super niche things that you see do really, really well. Like there is somebody out there that is definitely interested. I imagine you're largely working with entrepreneurs, so the books are going to be quite like expert style nonfiction. What if somebody, well, I'm sure there's loads of imposter syndrome and people think like, well, yeah, but who am I to write a book? I'm just dabbling over here. But how important do you think it is to involve storytelling in a book of that kind of genre? Because obviously if somebody's going to tell their life story, it's more of a memoir, it's and that's different. But if it's going to serve as a tool and part of a business, but perhaps you don't want to be too how-to, like step by step, like is there like an ideal balance that you can strike with that?
Well, yeah, I do work with a few memoir authors. If people are wanting to build their brand, I've got a couple coming out. One came out last week and I've got one coming out in October, where actually, these are CEOs of organizations who actually want to move forward to build their brand and actually share their message on a wider scale. But I think for your traditional kind of self-help book, how-to guides, story is so important because people want to know where you've come from. If you've gone through an experience where you've overcome the problem you're talking about in the book, people want to know how you've overcome it. If you have helped other people to go through experiences and come through the other side, you want to showcase their stories because it gives them that proof that what you're talking about works. So stories are so important. I've worked with people in the past, and I know people in the past who've not shared any of themselves in the book. And then there's a fine line because you don't want to be too kind of, what's the word for it? I talk about, talking from a healed scar or an open wound. If you're talking from an open wound and you're ranting about a topic and you haven't maybe resolved something, that's a hard place to start writing from. But when you're talking about it from a place of authority, that's when it makes it easier. So storytelling absolutely is essential, and being able to show that it's the best way of showing what you do, isn't it? By telling stories, by how you've worked with people, what you've experienced, what you've gone through, what's worked and what's happened and hasn't worked, and also being vulnerable as well.
Yeah, definitely, because that's when you get that whole know, like, and trust factor through books, isn't it? People are like, well, I really feel like I've connected a bit more with this person by delving into this book. I've got a couple of things that have come to mind when you were saying that. One, actually, just on that, this wasn't the first thing, but how much do you think audio and with audiobooks has... Well, how important do you think they are? Like, are people still reading physical books as much as audio? Does audio do anything at another level? Like, is there anything you know around that's of poignance?
Yeah. Audio is an interesting thing because if you are publishing it yourself, there's a massive cost in audio. I've recorded an audiobook myself. So back in 2019, I published one of my books as an audiobook. I wanted to see how it worked. I wanted to see kind of the pros and the cons. But actually, if you are funding the process yourself, it's another chunk of money that you need to invest. Because with anything around a book, it needs to be professional. If people are listening to you in their ears, it needs to be good quality. I've got a good quality mic here, like you have. You can't see mine, but it's a good quality mic. That's important. But you still can't replicate it in your office. For me, I went to a proper studio to actually record my audiobook. So that's important. I think that, and I love listening to audio now. I like to go on walks. I love listening to podcasts, audio. That is me. That's the sort of thing I love. But there is something about a physical book, isn't there? I have bookshelves, Lucy, full of books, client books, my books, all sorts of books. And I think, a physical book is so important. But people learn and, they consume information in different ways. So I'll be interested to hear what people think, actually. How do your listeners like to consume books? Is it a mixture? I'm a mixture person. But if I have a really good book that I find, I do want the print copy. But sometimes I listen to the audio and I go, oh yeah, I need Diary of a CEO, perfect example. Listen to it on audio when I need this in black and white, the hard copy in front of me now.
Yeah, I do exactly that. So I'll consume most by audio and I speed them up. But that's
I do that. Yeah, I do that as well.
It's just the way I work, and I can consume more in that way. If I were required to read every book in paperback format, I wouldn't get through anywhere near the amount of consumption as I do. So that works really well for me. But exactly like you, if I'm looking at my shelves here, and all the books I have, and a lot of them are untouched, but it's because I've listened to the audio and it's been a book that I've really, really loved, and I've wanted the physical so that if at a later date I go, what was that thing? I can thumb through and find it, which you can't really do with an audio. You can't just like flick through. It's like, oh, God knows where that was. But in the physical book, you can. So yeah, there's definitely a place for both as far as I'm concerned.
But then with a Kindle book as well, if you've got Kindle and you've got the audio, you can switch between the two, which is quite clever, isn't it? With, the whisper sync, isn't it? That you can flick between the two. Yeah, that's cool. Another thing to think about.
I've never been a Kindle person. But yeah, that's definitely an interesting one. I was thinking about the content as well in a book, and we talked about blogging and how you and all the different things and ways you're putting content out there and how that can take shape and become a book. What do you think, though, differentiates a book? Do you think it does go deeper? Do you think it does take the reader on another level of a journey? Because otherwise, we see all these online check sheets and free PDFs and downloads and, that sort of surface level. What differentiates a book in terms of your content stack as a business?
Well, I think as you just said, Lucy, it takes people to a different level, doesn't it? A blog is 1,000 words. A book is normally about 50,000 words. So there's a different, but it's important to think right from the very beginning, going back to the structure conversation, is think about the journey from the reader right from the very start. Where is your reader right now? What do they need help with? What's keeping them awake at night? What new information are they looking for? Where do they want to be? And then it's making sure that journey. That's why, again, structure is so important. And it just does go deeper. It gives some people those aha moments. And the way you structure it, whether you've got 15 chapters, 10 chapters, 3 parts, whatever it might be, but it's taking your reader on that journey that ultimately flows from one idea to the other without getting them confused on the way. So they just, it goes so much deeper, I think, than a blog. But blogs are great standalone bits of content. And if you are really smart about it, as we just talked about, the blog can go into a book can become a blog. There's so many different ways you can multi-purpose content to make it easy to write the book.
When it comes to business books and business owners and entrepreneurs writing a book for that reason, are there any key components that you think are essential in that book for it to really land with the audience, for it to be marketable and for it to serve a purpose? Because the book isn't necessarily just, for their own self-fulfilling reasons. They want it to do something. So, perhaps they want it to create curiosity, to be thought-provoking, or, they want the reader to take action, or maybe trust them more, or think of them as a voice for authority, but could it be in any number of things, or are there sort of a usual few that would be a motivator for a business owner to use a book as leverage in that way? Does that make sense?
I think so. I think it's really important to get clear on that message, again, going back to that one-liner, that message behind it. And also to be bold, to be brilliant. So I'm obviously on the right podcast to really step, this is an opportunity to be disruptive. This is an opportunity to say things that maybe you're not saying, or maybe say them in a different ways, or really to step into your authority. So I think that's what a brilliant book can do for you, when you're really, really focus on it. And there are different types of books you can write. And I think from the flow of information, you might be writing a how-to book, or as in my new book, I'm writing a why-to book. It's not necessarily taking people through a process, but having that kind of that structure behind it again is important. And it might be a memorable methodology I talk about in terms of it, it takes people through a process. It might just take people through a philosophy. It might take people through principles. I don't think it really matters. But again, that flow of information, that messaging behind it. So it comes very much down to that core thing, being clear on the vision and what you want to get from it. And I don't know if I'm necessarily giving you the answer that you're looking for, but it is about getting really clear on that vision, that it's kind of balancing the passion that you have through to the outcome that people are looking for. I'm not sure it answers your question. I know you're struggling to articulate it as well.
Yeah, exactly. No, but it does because I don't think it needs to be overly like intellectualized, because I think that if you know that it's going to serve you in your business, or there's a reason you want to get this out there for some reason, then that's a good enough reason. But I wondered if there was any sort of like core things, or like every book must have this intention or this thing or these, one of these. But when it comes to marketing them, that's probably sort of a different slant on the question. But when it comes to marketing a book, I think that can get overlooked sometimes, because often when we're writers or we're creators and we, getting that message out there and all of that is fine, but actually getting it into the hands of other people and giving them a good reason why they need to pick it up and get their hands on it is a whole nother brain space. It's a whole nother strategy. Would there be any particular hooks that would motivate somebody to buy, or that we would need to consider when it comes to marketing a book? So if somebody is at the starting blocks or even the idea stage now, and they're like, oh yeah, I can write my book, but I haven't got a clue how to get it out there. Obviously, building an audience, having a platform and all the things, that's one thing. But that connection between your work and the person who's going to say, I need that. Like, how do we do that?
I think one thing we've not really touched on so far is about, or not in a lot of details, is niche books. We're not writing a book for everybody in the world. And I think, a lot of people have resistance to that. They think, well, my book is for anybody, but actually nobody's going to gravitate towards it if you're not really clear on your first book, for example, it had a really, really targeted audience, didn't it? So I think that's the important thing. And sometimes we think, oh, am I going too niche? Is the market big enough? But actually, if your business is already around that niche, around that group of people, it's the perfect niche. In terms of taking people on your journey, you can do research around it. You can have conversations with people. You could do focus groups, surveys, interviews, podcasts. There's so many things that you can do to take people on the journey, videos, blogs, social media posts. It's never too early to actually market the book, but it is about finding the right people. And of course, you're going to have the people who know you already, who will go on the journey with you. But as you approach your launch, it's also about engaging other people to share it on your behalf. I'm working with one of my clients at the moment who's launching his book in end of October, and we're working on how do the people who already trust him share his message and his book with a wider audience. So again, it's having a business plan for the book.
Yes.
Let's face it, that's the simplest answer. Yeah. Actually having a business plan for the book so that it does reach the people you want to reach when you launch it.
Yeah, that is so true. And people knowing that when you're working on it and knowing who it's for, and just spreading the word. Yeah, I do understand that massively about that niche. Like if you know your audience, you know who it's for, the more niche it is, usually the easier that is, because you can very easily target who you're talking to. Yeah, sometimes when there's a bit of a crossover, you might have a secondary audience, or even a primary, secondary. I think that's good too. Like who you really targeting? I'm sure, like you mentioned Diary of a CEO, the primary audience probably is CEOs, entrepreneurs, whatever. There are probably plenty of people who aren't that, but that are maybe curious about that world, or maybe they're into personal development and they can see other elements from that narrative that would resonate with them, and then they like it, or they like Stephen Bartlett, or there's, so you've got these sort of subcategories. It's actually quite relieving to understand that it isn't that. We don't need to overcomplicate it, do we, when it comes to this kind of stuff? We don't need to overcomplicate it. Keep it simple.
Keep it simple. That's the thing. And I think a lot of people, when they're approaching the whole idea of writing a book, it feels like this massive project, but actually when you take it step by step and break it down into bite-sized chunks, it's easier. I often suggest people, in terms of, when do you want to, and I often ask the question, when do you want to launch the book? Often people are quite unrealistic in how long it takes to launch a book as well. But then you work backwards and you just take it one step at a time. You're not writing a whole book. You're writing, 1,000 words a day or 500 words a day or 2,000 words a week or a month or whatever it is. It's about breaking it into those bite-sized chunks and knowing that you've got someone to ask questions of in terms of, what's the next step that you need to take. People do overcomplicate the process. When I went into the book mentoring arena back in 2014, one of the reasons I did it is because I found too many people go, well, I can't do it. I'd love to do it, but actually, for me, I find it quite simple now. But because I've been doing it for so long, but people do overcomplicate the whole process. One step at a time.
Yeah, definitely. And I think if you have got a mentor and you've got somebody to guide you through it, and it is an element of accountability as well, would you suggest to somebody, if they said to you, well, how long do I need? Like, how long should it take? Is there a should around it, or is it literally, because I've heard people take years to complete a book, and like that's perfectly normal. And I agree with you. I think that the idea that it can be done in a flash is really unrealistic. If you're going to do it well and also market it, and that, it does take time and there's a lot involved in that. Is there a typical length from start to finish?
Well, if you're thinking about a 50,000 word book and you can, I write about 1,000 words in an hour. They might not be good 1,000 words, and sometimes I might ditch some of them. And I know that not everyone writes as quickly as I do. But normally, if you think about going from a standing start through to having a first draft, probably a shitty first draft, but a first draft within about 6 months, that is a realistic time frame. Some people do it quicker, some people take longer. As you say, some people take years. With the current book I'm writing about, I started thinking about it early stages of the pandemic. And it just had, I went through that messy, it was taking ages to formulate. And it's only been the last couple of months where it's gone, it's kind of coming together. But I know that I'll write it quite quickly when I really, really focus on it. So but it is that consistent action. It's about writing, I run a 6-week writing sprint because it is about taking, doing an hour a day. It doesn't have to be, yes, you can join me in Spain for a week and write your book, which is what I offer people once a year. Nice. But you can actually write for an hour a day and actually make progress. If you wrote an hour a day, got 1,000 words done, did it for 4 days a week, you'd have a book in no time. But it's consistent action. It's putting it in the diary. It's about not getting distracted. It's also about, whenever I've got a writing time in my diary, I know before I sit down to write what I'm planning on writing. I don't sit there and go, well, I'm going to write today. Where am I going to start? What chapter shall I write? What do I do first? Oh, look, the washing needs to go out. Social media. Oh, an email's just come in. No, it doesn't work like that. It's about that focused time. And an hour once a day, once a week should be doable for most people.
Yeah, so sitting down to work on your book and knowing what you're going to do is great. What if, so 2 things here, sometimes I find this, with all the best will in the world, I'm going to do some work on it, I'm going to sit down, and you just get blocked up. Maybe you didn't have a good night's sleep, or maybe your mind is somewhere else and you just can't get into that flow. Do you believe in not forcing it if it is just not coming, and going, okay, look, today isn't the day, step away, go for a walk, like just to come away from it and then come back when because sometimes it's, with the best will in the world, it is a creative art form. So to force it out when you're not feeling it can't be the best thing to do, right?
There's a couple of things you can do. I am true believer in going out for a walk. Actually, in an ideal world, before a writing session, I'd go out for a walk, I'd think about what I want to write, and then I'd write it. Normally, I find that I just don't have enough hours in the day to do that. So I do sit myself, I'm a morning person if I'm writing. So I like to sit down in the morning and I like to get my words done before I do anything else, before I get distracted. And not everyone's like me. One of the things that I created over the summer was writing prompts. And that's another thing to think about. So having a writing prompt, I created 24 that I was using with my clients over the summer. And they really helped to spark things off. Like, a writing prompt might be, write about something that you don't like in your industry. You could, imagine you were talking to a friend in a cafe about this chapter. There's all sorts of writing prompts that can move you forward. And the third thing that you could do, which may be a bit of controversy here, is use something like ChatGPT to help you to get out of that funk. And just, I'm writing a chapter about this, or I'm writing a section on this. Can you spark me off? Or can you give me a writing prompt? That's another tool that you could use if you're, short on time and you're familiar with ChatGPT, and I'm not saying use ChatGPT to write a book at all, but actually it can spark things off, and I use it to help organize the chaos in my head, because I'm quite an organized person, but actually when I have loads of ideas, it's just like, how are they all going to come out in a way that makes sense to people? And it can really help with that. So 3 things there: go out for a walk, using writing prompt, or use a tool like ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, one of the AI tools to actually help you.
I like that. Actually, I'm also a fan of going for walks and just taking yourself away from all the busyness and the distractions. And that's often where, in that space, a quiet space, is where things become clear and then really land for you. And if they're not, sometimes just tuning into something that resonates will spark that. So it might be listening to something else, a different book or a podcast, or having a chat with one of these AI tools to kind of go, thinking about this, talk to me about this. What would I, and especially if you've got a relationship with a platform that you've got familiar with, and go, knowing what you know about the work I do, what do you see, and getting those sort of insights, I think, can be valuable. Which actually is a nice segue into one of my questions, which was going to be around AI and the use of AI in writing. Now, I'll be straight up and say, like, I personally believe there's a place for this. I think that, like you said before, we're not suggesting you sit down and use a book to write your book for you, because what would be the point? It's not then your work. But we do have these amazing tools that are no different to, in some ways, you know, like talking to your friend or asking Google about some stats or some research. I think there is a place for it, like you said, to order some scattered thoughts you have, or go, I'm trying to say this. Is there a better word for that? Or like, what are your thoughts on that? And what do you see in books and publishing going forward in how this and how AI might impact that?
Well, that's a big question, Lucy.
Isn't it just massive? This is a whole nother episode.
I know. When ChatGPT came into my, I came across it. It was just probably January 2.5 years ago. I went, well, I had a choice. I have a choice. I could ignore it or I can embrace it. I chose to embrace it. So I ran 3 webinars for my audience around it. I used it to help me update Book Marketing Made Simple, which is one of my books. And I was blatant in there in terms of, this was created, there was a section on there around messaging or blogging or something like that. And I just used ChatGPT and I shared an example in there. So I use ChatGPT all the time. It's great for research. But what I will say with AI is it can, especially ChatGPT, it can make things up. So you do need to check references. So if it gives you some stats, make sure you have the reference, because your editor will ask you where something comes from. And if you can't go back to them with the kind of the URL, the reference behind it, you won't be able to use it, of course. But for sorting out scattered thoughts, for organizing structure, it has its pros and cons. Sometimes it works really well, and sometimes it is a pain in the ass. But I use it all the time, just to, especially if you struggle with just getting all of scattered thoughts together. It's really powerful. So I use it all the time just to sort my brain out and just to help me move forward. It is like having a coach for me around my own writing and my own creative process, I guess.
And ultimately, it's not going away. We're already, these things are only going to become more and more integrated in our day-to-day lives. Like, I'm sure teachers have a nightmare with students and turning in homework and going, well, did you do this or did you? And I think that's, instead of boycotting it, like you said, I think it is embracing it and learning how to use it as well, rather than an instead. So not like, it's going to replace the kids' homework or it's going to replace my writing, but actually, how can I use it to help enhance what I do, support what I do, but whilst remaining the human in the driving seat, controlling it rather than it taking over. And I think, it's definitely the research thing I have found really helpful, or even just going, what other titles would cover this, and what other, it's just, you can just get the same information you'd get if you spent a few hours at a library, but faster. And it's, what's wrong with that?
Absolutely. And I think it's a really good tool if you use it well. And I think it's you have to have the idea. You have to know what you're writing about, who it's for. You need to have it all in your mind and actually use it within ChatGPT. And I know I've got the paid for version, and I don't share my information outside of my own ChatGPT, of course. And I recommend people tick that box. But I think it's just, when your ChatGPT gets to know you, you do create that relationship with it, don't you? In terms of, you can say, based on what you know about me, as you say, give me some ideas for this chapter. And I think, especially for writer's block, I think it can be really powerful in terms of, you're writing. When I was updating Book Marketing Made Simple, I was writing more about creating a street team, and it was a new chapter for the book. And I just used ChatGPT to say, okay, so I'm writing about this. This is my idea. What do I need to include in the chapter? And it just helped me to bring the ideas together. And that was back 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. So it's obviously evolved and changed and developed. And it's quite scary sometimes.
But you also, you get out what you put in, right? So if somebody just says something like, if somebody said, oh, write a chapter on blah, 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 like, you're just going to get something really generic. It's going to be soulless, and that's going to be obvious. But I think when you use it to support you in something, and you really put loads and loads and loads in, obviously what comes out is you just polished. And I think of it sometimes in the same way. If, like we said before, you can author a book and not actually be the writer behind it. And there are some amazing authors out there who have sat down with a writer, shared everything, and then that writer has the skill to then bring all of that essence into the written word and get that down. And in some ways, that can be done now using artificial intelligence rather than a human supporter, but it does have to be a collaborative. I think that's it, isn't it? It's collaborating with, not handing it over and delegating the task. But it's an interesting topic. I'm sure the conversation around this will be different even in 6 months and in a year, because it's changing so quickly. But I think AI's got its tails. Certainly ChatGPT's got its tails. I can tell if something's been written and hasn't been humanized. Humanized, that's a better word than authorified. I can tell when things are just purely AI. But in terms of writing anything, I think, but then, will it make us lazy? Will it make us, I've questioned myself, will it make me lazy, in terms of, not thinking for myself all the time? But I think it's just, it's that fine line, isn't it? I think it's another tool in our toolkit, like we might use Atticus or Scrivener or, Publisher Rocket, which is another great tool that, you can use in terms of marketing a book. There's so many tools out there, but it's using it as a tool rather than something you rely on all the time. A takeover. I think, that's exactly it. I have those same worries. I don't want AI to make us lazy, not think, lose the ability to think for ourselves and be imaginative. Like I have those same concerns, but then I think of it like any big evolution or invention. And I was talking about this on some content recently, that, when we invented cars, it wasn't like, oh no, now we're not going to walk anywhere. We're never going to run. It's going to destroy our ability to exercise. It's like, no, we just find other ways to do that. And actually now, instead of having to walk miles and miles and miles, we can go in a car or a vehicle, but now we can walk for pleasure and for recreation and actually get so much, rather than getting, painful feet and actually damaging our bodies sometimes, but actually we can go and do it recreationally and for fulfillment and for wellness. And I think that there's possibly a similar application to this with technology. And it's just like, okay, this technology could prevent us from doing these things, but how can we actually tap into using those things now in a way that instead of for necessity, but we can use them for better stuff that's more fulfilling and intentional rather than survival. So I think it's just about a shift in how we operate. But it is a whole big other topic.
That's a whole big other topic.
So another question I've got for you is around publishing. Self-publishing and traditional publishing. Like, I've explored both of these, and I think there's a place for both, as I'm sure you would agree. There's absolutely a place for both. But for somebody who doesn't have a clue, that might think, well, how on earth would I ever get my book out there? Like, a self-publishing is an amazing route for, and anyone can publish a book, because there's a way. And it's a bit like, you used to have, you couldn't get on TV before unless somebody gave you permission. Now you can just go on YouTube and create your own TV show. So it's great for that. What would somebody who has no idea need to consider in order to decide whether they should shoot for the self-published path or whether they should go for a traditional publishing option?
Another long answer coming up, Lucy.
That's good. That's fine.
$1 million question. Yeah, pros and cons to each. I think, self-publishing, independent publishing has made it much more accessible. I wrote my first book in 2009. I think there was the ability to self-publish. I went down the hybrid route for that. I have self-published most of my books. Apart from that, I've contributed to a traditionally published book, and I'd love to get a publishing deal for this new one. I haven't said that out loud before now. But it's not the be-all and end-all. But it does come to how much money you're willing to invest, how much time are you willing to spend. Because a self-published book, and I would recommend if you're going down the self-publishing route to work with a self-publishing partner. Don't do it yourself, because it won't be good enough quality unless you know how to do it yourself and you're a designer and you can use these tools. So there's, I've seen some really shoddy work being published in the past. So I would say work with people that can do the job well. But you can get a book out in about 4 months, less, depending on what route you take. Whereas if you're going down the traditional route, you're looking at probably a year-ish. And that's from actually finding a publisher, whether you go down the agent route, whether you pitch to the publisher. There's a whole, loads of things. It can take a long time to get a publishing deal. Obviously, if you're, going down the self-publishing route, you'll be investing your own money. Whereas if you go down the traditional publishing route, they'll invest in you. But from a marketing point of view, it's the same difference. You still need to market your book. You can't just rely on your publisher to do it for you. So there's about 5 different things. I've only tapped on a couple of those, but there are different things to think about. One important thing is your intellectual property. If you publish it yourself, you retain your intellectual property, and ultimately you can do what you like with it. If you go down the traditional route, you need to make sure you can use your stuff. Imagine publishing a book about your 10-step process and then having to get permission to create a course or create a talk, something that's really important that not many people think about when they go down the traditional route.
They own the IP.
That's a number. Yeah, absolutely. It depends on the contract, but you can, depending on the company. But yeah, of course, it's absolutely essential you own your own IP and you can use it freely as you wish.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And my understanding as well is typically a publisher won't really consider somebody who doesn't have a decent sized audience or ability to market that book, because like you said, they're not going to do it for you. Then there's some leverage they can give you, but they want to see that you can sell that book and basically get them their money back. So
absolutely.
I think that's definitely something that you have to think about if you're going to go down that route. Pros and cons to both, 100%.
Yeah. And some people, I've got one client, she self-published her first book. She's got a publishing deal for her second. So I think when you've got that proof that you can do it and you can say, hey, I've got these books behind me, this is the success I've had, give me a publishing deal, you're probably more likely to get it. But I think those that have got, and I also know people that have done the other way, they've got a traditional publishing deal for their first book, realize that they don't get much royalties from it, that they don't have much control, and then they self-publish their second book. So it goes both ways.
How that goes. Definitely. I feel the same, and I've self-published, and this new one I definitely want published. But that said, if I don't get the right deal, I won't not do it. I'll go ahead anyway. The backup plan would be to self-publish it, but it's I just want to kind of test both.
We're in a similar stage, I think, really, and it's just about knowing you've got that choice, knowing that let's go for this, see what happens. I think knowing the right people is always useful when it comes to publishing as well. If you've got connections or you've got an in with a particular publisher, that helps. Certainly following the guidance on that they put out there in terms of what they're looking for. And sometimes there's a lot of hoops to jump through. There was one I was looking at recently. There was a hell of a lot of hoops, and then you've got to decide, is it worth jumping through those hoops? But I think it doesn't matter how you publish. You still got to write a really good book. It's still got to look good. It's got to be brand building. It's got to be aligned to what you do. There's no skimping on quality. Self-publishing is just another way of doing it. I was at Amazon HQ recently, and there's a lot of, they were saying that independent authors are 2 years ahead of traditional publishers as well. And that was quite an interesting stat that they say, because of some of the stuff that we're doing, because I think we're knowing the importance that, we have nobody else to market our books apart from ourselves. And that was fiction and non-fiction, but it was interesting being in that environment and hearing from two independent authors, both in the fiction world, who have had some amazing successes and what they're doing. You know, being able to tap into what they've been doing has been amazing.
Oh my gosh, there's so much to it. It's a whole world in itself, isn't it? And I can imagine, well, obviously you have a whole business in that space, and for a lot of people the book is an add-on or a bolt-on to actually the rest of their business and what they do. They're not just writing books all day long, so it is something that needs to slot in. But I think, if you have a message, if you have an audience you want to reach, and you can see value in getting that out there, but it's also going to create leverage and impact and visibility, then I really think books are a great way to do that, and I don't think that's going to go away. So if people want help with that, how can they best reach you, Karen? We will put links to you in the show notes, but where would you say the best place to start? If someone's got a question, a burning question right now, where would you send them?
You can find me on all the normal platforms, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram, or go to my website, librotas.com, librotas.com, which is made up of Libro for book and Libertas as in freedom, because ultimately I want people to have the freedom to express themselves, and as you just said a moment ago, is building that authority, that credibility, and that expertise through what's already in your head.
Love that. That's just beautiful. Great name. Of course. Fun with words. I love it. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming and sharing your wisdom on book writing and all things authoring today on a podcast. And we'll be sending people your way to talk more about your services. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and remember, go out there and shine your light bright, because you were born to be brilliant.